So in the last talk, where we were on the porch of the Norman Hackerman building, and we were introducing this notion of neuroplasticity, and we're right there where neuroscience is done on the UT campus. And we're going to continue that discussion in this talk, really looking at, in particular, ways we can use that neuroplasticity as a way of shaping our own brain to be better at creative problem solving. So I mentioned in that talk on the porch of the Norman Hackerman building that this plasticity is dependent on really making demands on your brain. It doesn't just happen, and you shape the brain you have because you make certain demands on it, and somebody else shapes a very different kind of brain because they make different demands on it. And I want us to talk for a few minutes here about three things that are important in order to have this kind of neuroplasticity. The first of these is that it really requires a very, very strong and intense and sustained mental focus. So if you really want to gain new brain capability, the first thing you need to do is intense, sustained mental focus. So activities that are performed without really paying strong attention, that you're just doing it and it's having an effect, are likely not to stick in nearly the same way as something that you're focusing your attention on. And for sure, fast learning that is not sustained over a long period of time, but just that fast cram it in, that can strengthen existing neuronal connections, but it's not likely to actually establish new neuronal connections. So in order to really establish a new brain capability, you have to have intense, sustained mental focus. Now, I'm going to give you two examples of how that works that just blow me away, both of these. So these are two social science experiments. The first one is where they took a bunch of people, two groups, that are trying to learn the piano. So they've got keyboards in front of them. And one is called the physical practice group, and the other one is the mental practice group. So in the physical practice group, they are playing on that keyboard and learning a new piece of music. And the mental practice group is not actually, they don't have a keyboard. They're just imagining playing that song, and they're imagining the way it would sound. They're just doing it totally in their head with intense mental concentration on that. Now, both of these groups are doing sustained, intense concentration in order to learn that. But one of them is only doing it mentally, and the other one is doing it mentally and physically. So the thing that is amazing about this is that group that did it mentally were almost as good when they gave them a piano to play it on as the group that did it physically. At the very first day, they were a little more awkward, but if you gave them just 2 hours to sit down and practice for a minute, they got to be just as good as the group that was a physical practice group. So we think of learning to play the piano as being about your fingers moving, but it is about establishing neuronal connections in your brain. And if you're establishing those with intense, sustained mental energy in your brain, that's getting you most of the way there. The actual physical moving of the fingers is just a little extra to get you over the finish line. So that intense mental activity, very important for establishing new neuronal connections. This is the one that totally blows me away. So these are two groups that are both trying to increase their strength. And there is the mental practice group, and there's the physical practice group again. So the mental group is just imagining doing muscle contractions while also imagining a voice saying, harder, harder. So you're sitting there just imagining pushing that barbell up. Whereas the physical practice group is out there really pushing the iron up. The physical group increased their strength by 30%. But the mental group, with no working out on the weights, increased their strength by 22%. Not as much, but still substantially. So again, we think of when I'm gaining strength, that's about me moving those muscles. It is about making neuronal connections in your brain that increase your ability to lift that weight. So this intense, sustained concentration, whether you're learning music, whether you're getting gross motor skills, any kind of skill you're getting, it's important to have that intense and sustained mental focus. Okay, the second thing that enhances plasticity is that new demands rather than repeating old skills is the key here. You have to have novel environments that trigger neurogenesis. And you must learn something new rather than replaying already mastered skills to really improve your plasticity. So let me give you an example of that. So two examples. One is, again, a social science study where they were studying high school students and college students. So they looked at their amount of brain power, the number of synaptic connections they had in their brain when they were in their senior year in high school and when they were in their freshman year in college. So they're looking at the difference between August of your senior year in high school and graduation, and you're seeing how much you improve your brain capacity. And then they're looking at August of your freshman year in college and the end of your freshman year and how much you improved your brain capacity. And in high school, there was a modest improvement. In college, there was a freaking phenomenal improvement in your brain capability. And that's because in high school, you'd already been there for 3 years. Nothing was very new. You got up in the morning, your mom fixed you breakfast, you went off to school, you went to this class, this class, this class. Yeah, there was a little bit of improvement in your senior year, but it's not new stuff. So it's not generating new brain capacity. But when you go to college, suddenly, nope, mom's not there. She's not waking up. She's not making you breakfast. Nope, you don't go to school at 8 o'clock every morning and go home at 4 o'clock every afternoon. You've got a really different kind of schedule. Nope, not the same old friends you've always had all along. Brand new set of friends. Everything's different. And in that new environment, oh my God, the neurogenesis just takes off. So it's phenomenally more fertile in a period of time when you're challenging yourself with new things. Another example of that, and this is just anecdotal, but in the School of Architecture, we have tons of travel programs. And so I've had hundreds and hundreds of students. I get to know them in their freshman or sophomore year. Maybe they go off on a travel program as a junior or senior. They come back, and I will tell you that person is transformed. The difference in being in a completely different environment in Europe or in Asia or wherever they went on their travel program, they come back, wow, so much sharper, so much more intense. And it's because they put themselves in a new environment. If you want this new brain capacity, the first key is intense, sustained concentration. The second thing is put yourself with new challenges, fresh things that you have to deal with. Okay, third thing is, and this has come up before, it's physical activity. That you will have more growth of your brain, you will be able to acquire greater capabilities if you have a lot of physical activity. It increases the production of neurons in your brain. It also stimulates the release of neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. So we talked about the fact that when neurons wire together, it is the dendrites and the axons getting close to each other, but then that neurotransmitter actually making the bridge between them in that synapse. And those neurotransmitters are produced in your body in much greater intensity if you have physical activity. If you're a couch potato, not so much. Now, there's some other things that affect that too. For instance, if you get a lot of daylight, it increases serotonin production. If you stay inside all the time, it diminishes serotonin production. So can you actually increase the neuroplasticity of your brain by having additional physical activity? So again, there have been studies on this. This guy, Gerd Kimperman, at the Salk Institute in La Jolla at UC San Diego, took a bunch of mice, older mice. Some of them are sitting in their sedentary cages. He put some of them into an environment with lots of little wheels they can run on and tubes they can run down and balls they can play with. And then in 45 days, he checked their, again, the kind of size of their brain, the number of neuronal connections. And after 45 days, 40,000 new neurons, a 15% increase in their brain capacity among the group that had physical exercise compared to the mice that just lived in their standard sedentary cages. He also found that exercise stimulates the production of the neurological growth factor, BDNF, which plays a really crucial role in affecting plastic change as well. So these are three things. If you want to really make your brain able to get these new capabilities, you need to think of sustained, intense activity. You need to think of new challenges, and you need to think of physical exercise. Okay, this all applies to many different functions in the brain. Your fine motor skills are neuronal connections so that you can improve your ability to play the piano, your ability to play a guitar, your ability to pick up small objects and manipulate them. That can all be done by neuroplasticity. Gross motor skills. And again, this is the sort of thing, if you're working out in the gym and you've been working with a certain set of machines, and then you try out this new machine, and oh my God, it's so awkward. And at the beginning, but in fact, if you keep intense, sustained activity on this new kind of thing with physical activity, before long, it's super easy, and you can do that, and you can't believe how natural it feels and how easy it comes to you. That's gross motor skills using these three different neuroplasticity devices. It's even true of emotional bonds, friendships, romance. Those emotional bonds can be increased by these three different factors. Even something like, that you take for granted, like the way your heart beats or your sense of balance or things that are not conscious operations of the brain, they're affected by that. And even instinctive behavior like sex. You either make new neuronal connections and new capabilities and more intense capabilities, or without those kinds of stimuli, you're where you were before. So this is pretty incredible stuff. Neuroplasticity applies equally to the frontal lobes that really affect your ability to do creative thinking, and that's the most germane to this course. And in fact, the amount of real estate that you claim in your brain for creative thought can be improved by exactly this kind of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity even allows one hemisphere to compensate for the other hemisphere. This is called mirror region takeover. And I want to talk about two instances that really let you kind of see the flexibility of your brain to be able to do things you absolutely could never do before. So there was this little kid, Paul, who at 7 months old was in a car accident, and it destroyed his right parietal lobe. And then at 17, he was having problems learning calculus. Normally, your right parietal lobe deals with the way you negotiate space, the way you get around in the world. And the left parietal lobe deals with mathematics and more quantitative kinds of things. So he destroyed his right parietal lobe. He should have not been able to really negotiate his way around in the world. But in fact, he learned to negotiate his way around in the world just fine. But what happened was the left parietal lobe took over that necessary function. When he was a tiny little kid, it took over that function, even though that's not normally where it would reside. But then the left parietal lobe is where you would learn math. And when he got to be 17 years old and he started to make those demands about mathematics, that part of the brain was already wired to do something else. So you have to realize that your brain is going to respond to the demands that are made on it, and it's going to follow that route. And in this case, it made him have difficulty, or had to kind of relearn and rewire his brain to do math in an area that would normally it would have been easy, but because he had used it for something else, it was much harder. The fMRI showed that the left lobe was processing the visual and spatial information that should have been in the right lobe, and it didn't leave any room for the normal things that happen in the left lobe. So prior to 6-year-old, before he was ever challenged with learning math, he was having demands made on the visual and spatial activity. And it found a new home for that, since he didn't have a right parietal lobe that would allow him to negotiate the world through that. So this is how flexible the brain is to accommodate what demands you put on it. So now let's move to the frontal lobe, which is really where creative thought normally occurs. So this little girl, Michelle, damaged her left frontal lobe from birth. And normally the left frontal lobe stores information, and the right frontal lobe processes that information and finds connections and analogies and really is the conceptual side of the frontal lobe. And they work together for the most part, and they're developed far greater in human beings than there are in other animals, and that's really where our intelligence and our creativity lies. But because she had this damage, she had the same mirror area adaptation as Paul. So whereas her left lobe should have been taking in information and her right lobe should have been processing it conceptually, because her left lobe was damaged, the right lobe took over that and it began to process just the information. And it filled itself up with information. But then it left her unable to kind of get the main point, or to understand metaphors, or to have abstract thinking, or to do planning, or to envision the future. All of those things that are about creativity, or imagination, or thinking, those things, there was no room for them to be done because all that just information was being stored in the right side, and it wasn't available to do these more conceptual things. But the interesting thing is, Michelle had this kind of savant ability to remember individual information, to remember exact dates, to memorize cards. For instance, if you want to play solitaire, she was a savant in that way. And that's because these two lobes of your brain normally kind of work together and keep each other in check, the information and the dealing with the information. If you don't have the normal ability to get the information, but the side of the brain that deals conceptually gets filled up with that information, it has a super ability to just take in data, but then it doesn't have the ability to process it. And Norman Deutsch says in this book, The Brain That Changes Itself, that people without disabilities can sometimes benefit, get that kind of savant capability by liberating one hemisphere from the other, by not having it completely keep each other in check. So this idea of kind of customizing your brain, getting a designer brain to do what you want it to do, this is something that now we understand we can kind of make that happen. Now, one of the really big takeaways from Norman Deutsch's book is this notion of the culturally modified brain. And in fact, the chapter that you're reading in his book, The Brain That Changes Itself, is called The Culturally Modified Brain. And what he's saying is that we put ourselves in a culture that then shapes our brain. And so it makes intense demands on us in that particular culture, and that's what produces the kind of brain we have. So that means that we need to be very cognizant of what culture we're putting ourselves in. And this goes back to that discussion of the historical perspective and the movement from the organizational age to the creative age. Are you putting yourself in a culture that stimulates and demands those things that you want your brain to be able to accommodate? And then this begins to go to, for example, the reading we did from Richard Florida, where he talked about the kind of job you might have. So if you understand that your brain is shaped by the culture it's in, if you get a job where there's a large capacity for personal expression, where you're able to speak freely, you're able to dress like you want to dress, you're able to be relaxed and be yourself, that will give you certain brain capability, a much more liberated way of thinking than if you're in a culture that tamps you down and says, you behave this way, you don't have any freedom of personal expression. If you have the freedom to shape your job, if the job is a little more ambiguous and you can take your own initiative, then again, that constantly gives you that sustained activity of I'm constantly looking for something new, something challenging, a new way to address that problem, then that will shape your brain to be more creative. Even something like flexible time, if I have the ability to, I am burned out this afternoon. I'm going to go take a run instead of staring at this screen for another 3 hours and being not productive. And then going out and taking that run and coming back and being re-energized. And if you do that on a regular basis, and you have the flexible time to do that, that shapes your brain. It is the culture that you're put in that is shaping your brain. The same way a flat organization where everybody's kind of got a say, as opposed to a hierarchical organization where you're told exactly what you're supposed to do, at what time you're supposed to do it, and how you accomplish that. If you're in that culture for a long enough period of time, it shapes your brain in a certain way. Same way with that personal motivation. We talked about motivation 3.0, intrinsic motivation. If you're in a culture that says, yes, dude, use your intrinsic motivation, then you are constantly bombarded with the capability to expand your brain to be motivated by that. Whereas if you're in an environment where no, it's carrot and stick motivation, then you're likely not to be nearly as creative. So it's the culture you put yourself in that often is responsible for shaping your brain. And it also is whether you're doing these things we've talked about all through the class. Are you leading an experiential life? That's shaping your brain. Csikszentmihalyi's 4-step recipe. Are you surprising yourself? Are you surprising others? That's shaping your brain. Whether you're participating in self-education, whether you're constantly thinking, can I get new skills? What do I want to be able to do? That again is shaping your brain. So the takeaway today in this talk is that we can use this neuroplasticity to make the brain we want to have and to make the brain that maybe makes us a more productive individual in the context of creative problem solving and in a creative age. So think about this. We'll discuss it a little more in the check-in. See you next time.